Welcome, everyone. Today, we're interviewing Dr. Paula Kahumbu, who stands at the forefront of wildlife conservation, serving as a passionate and visionary CEO for WildlifeDirect. Known for her indomitable spirit in the fight against elephant poaching and ivory trafficking, she has led significant campaigns such as Hands Off Our Elephants alongside Kenyan First Lady Margaret Kenyatta. Educated in ecology and evolutionary biology, Dr. Kahumbu's journey from studying primates to becoming an influential figure in conservation was inspired by her early mentorship under Dr. Richard Leakey. Her role extends beyond leadership. As a National Geographic Explorer and trustee, educator, and children's book author, Paula Kahumbu embodies the relentless pursuit of a harmonious coexistence between humans and wildlife. Paula, welcome.
Thank you so much for that, Seamus.
It's really, really wonderful to have you here. I'm going to start with a question really about you. And just if you could share your journey with us, growing up in Nairobi to getting a PhD at an Ivy League university in the United States to becoming a leading wildlife conservationist. What pivotal moments have defined your career path?
Well, I was born and raised here in the city of Nairobi. I actually live on the outskirts, so it's a part of the city that is actually renowned for its forests and wilderness. There were lots of animals around us, and I'm one of 9 children in my family. I was not I was right in the middle. I was the 6th born, so I was not the loudest. I was very quiet, very timid. I followed the leaders. I have 4 brothers and 4 sisters, and I spent a lot more time with my brothers. So I was very much a tomboy, climbing trees, wading through swamps and doing all the stuff the boys did. At school, though, I went to a private religious school, a Catholic school. And by the end of high school, I had to make a choice. My mother felt that since we couldn't afford to go to university, I should become a secretary. And I actually survived 3 months of that. I then ran away because as a child, I'd had such incredible exposure to wildlife and nature, and I'd sneaked into libraries, and read loads of books, and I had fallen in love with this idea of being out in the wild. I'd gone on field trips with school, and I decided that being a secretary was never going to work for me. And I ran away with a friend of mine to the National Museums of Kenya. I went to a seminar and I met a team of amazing British scientists who had been studying one of our national parks, and they had the most extraordinary stories about collecting fish and snakes and birds and all kinds of things. And I decided that that's it. I could be a scientist as well. And that led me on a very narrow corridor down to Richard Leakey's office, and I knocked on the door. And I knew him as a child. I can't say I know him, but I knew of him. I'd met him when I was a child. And I went into his office and I reminded him that we're quite close to each other. He lived across the road from me. And I said, I wanted to be a ranger. I just want to go and live somewhere in the wilderness and save lions and other animals. And he was amazing. He listened to me. He talked to me about my dreams, and then basically took me under his wing and introduced me to all kinds of people and opportunities. And I spent the next year going out into laboratories, into the field, and meeting scientists, being a field assistant, and discovering that I didn't want to work in labs. I didn't want to work on animals that were under the needle. I wanted to work out in nature, in a forest somewhere. And that really gave me the courage to apply for university, apply for scholarships, and going from university to university on scholarships until I got my PhD studying elephants. That's really how it happened. It was a leap of faith, I guess, that knocking on that door would get me to what I wanted.
Well, tell us about WildlifeDirect. It's really multifaceted and very savvy, and many initiatives. But what would you like to let us know about that?
Well, WildlifeDirect was actually founded by Richard Leakey. After I finished my PhD, I went to work for government, actually under him, but he then left and went and did other things. And then I went and worked with the private sector. And he called me one day and he said, why don't you come and work for me? He had just started WildlifeDirect. He wanted it to be an amazing engine for conservation in Africa, that would connect people all around the world to the people who are at the front line on the African continent, the people who are doing the real work. And I joined with this idea that we would create a blogging platform and we would just tell amazing stories from the grassroots. After a few years, I became the CEO and decided that the storytelling on its own wasn't enough. We needed to take actions. We needed to learn from all the stories we were hearing from around the continent and actually take action on the issues. So one of them was the poisoning of wildlife in retaliation for things like human-wildlife conflict. And the other thing was the poaching of elephants and rhinos. And Richard and I one day sat down and decided that campaigning for a species like the elephants was something that in our lifetime we could make a very big difference if we joined forces. And so we launched a campaign called Hands Off Our Elephants. And that was really where WildlifeDirect suddenly exploded onto the screens, because it was no longer about putting a little bit of money into organizations around the continent. It was very much about what's our position, what is our stand as Africans against the extinction of a species that matters so much to us. We had to get the buy-in of the public, of ordinary people, of the media, of the government. So it was a very, very challenging time, a very, very difficult moment, because, of course, the government agencies didn't want to admit that there were problems. They didn't want to admit that they were failing. And so it was, I would say, one of the most pivotal moments in my life where I had to step right outside of my comfort zone and tackle things head on with clarity and with really with the vision that we will succeed, and we did.
Elephants are universally known. I mean, virtually there's no child in the world that couldn't identify an elephant, and we have enormous affection for them. What are the things that most people don't know they don't know about elephants?
Oh, wow. That's a hard question. A lot of people don't know that although elephants are such iconic species around the world, and children all over the world know them and watch films about them and wear pajamas covered in them, in Africa, many people don't know anything about elephants, have never seen an elephant, and are terrified of elephants, that their relationships with elephants are not the charismatic Dumbo or the elephants that you see in the movies, that elephants actually are scary animals. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have, is this, I would say, opposing perspectives about an animal, and that those perspectives are created very much by the media.
So people have different relationships to elephants based on the actual situation they find themselves in.
Absolutely.
But there's one of your degrees is in ethnobiology. Could you explain what that is for people?
Oh, I don't have a degree in ethnobiology. My degree is in ecology, but ethnobiology is really about indigenous knowledge about ecology and biology.
Well,
so for example, sorry.
Please.
Well, I was just going to say, there is so much indigenous knowledge, not just in Africa, I would say all over the world, but I would say that in Africa, much of the indigenous knowledge about our ecosystems, our landscapes, our species, our relationship with these animals, is very little of it has ever been documented. And so it's been discounted against modern science. And it's hilarious to sometimes go to these big international institutions that are doing research on things like how wildlife change the landscape, how they change and alter ecosystems. And the indigenous local knowledge has always, had that very clear. And many of the practices, for example, pastoralism, are based on this knowledge. So there's quite a lot of time has been wasted because certain people were never listened to, were believed to be ignorant or uneducated, when in fact their knowledge of the land and the places and the animals and their relationships is profound. And sadly, we're losing a lot of that knowledge because much of it has never been documented.
Well, I'd imagine it's also really essential to your conservation efforts. the
Yeah, absolutely. We now, I think, have taken a major turn in Kenya, where the communities who live in rural areas, which are very high in biodiversity, are becoming some of the most important champions for conservation. And so I moved from pure biology to working on policy and advocacy, and now very much on storytelling and making wildlife documentaries. And so one of the most phenomenal things about filmmaking is the power of stories and the power of these moving images, the power of the voice of local people for other people in our landscapes. We love David Attenborough. He's phenomenal, but his voice is not relatable or as relatable to people in rural parts of Kenya. And when I watch a community in a rural area watching a film with a person from their community speaking in their language, the level of concentration and pride is so valuable, and it's translating into behavior change on the ground. People now see that, well, actually, we do have indigenous knowledge that is valuable. We have been validated, and what the knowledge we have is valuable. So things are changing, maybe not as fast as I would like, but things are changing.
I think was something that a lot of those of us that live in North America, we have lots and lots of places that are set aside for wildlife, and they're parks. They're basically places where nobody lives. But the kind of conservation that you're concerned for, people actually live in the places where you're trying to protect the wildlife, right?
It's a mix. We do have national parks where there are no people living in them. We have national forests, and we have conservancies and different kinds of conservation areas. And in some of them, people do live, and in some places, they're not even protected in a formal sense, where people live on those landscapes with those animals and with nature. And I think that is something that is increasingly becoming recognized, that it doesn't take a gun and a bunch of rangers to protect nature. It takes people who have an understanding of the land and how to manage the land, and a connection to it to actually protect it.
You recently produced a 4-part National Geographic series, The Secret of Elephants, and I'm curious what it took to get National Geographic and Disney to agree to tell that story.
Well, I started making wildlife documentaries, I think it was in 2014, because we weren't able to bring those international documentaries made in my country back to our country to be shown on air. It was very difficult to persuade Disney, Nat Geo, BBC, all these guys to release the films for local consumption. And I really do believe that the environmental movement needs this education. This content is very, very important. So in the end, I turned to a TV station. I said, let's make content ourselves. And we started there. And since then, I've made lots of content. And I think National Geographic, when I became an explorer, they started noticing this and realizing that there is an opportunity here. And they've actually now support a lot of wildlife filmmakers in Africa. So indigenous local filmmakers, which is literally only in the last 5 years or so. So a big shift happened. And when the series Secrets of the Whales was premiered 3 years ago, it was such a huge success that they decided to make a franchise of it. And the next series was Secrets of the Elephants. And they called me up immediately and said, we want to do this series and we want you to be the presenter. What's interesting about that is they've never had an African presenter for a landmark series like this. So it was a really wonderful moment for them to also come clean and say, we're abiding by our new policy, our new strategy, which is to give voices to those underrepresented voices within the National Geographic network. And I'm sure you've seen, they've made thousands and thousands of films, and very few of them have leading voices from the countries in the global south where those films are being shot.
Well, it sounds like that creates a huge opportunity for the reaching the local communities that have some of the greatest influence on the welfare of the the elephants?
Well, I would say first, having more content being made locally, of course, is very, very important. But all of these big major filmmakers have systems and processes in place that make it very difficult for those films to be seen in Africa. So I'll give you the example of Secrets of the Elephant. It's on Disney Plus, and Disney Plus is only accessible in Africa, in South Africa and Nigeria. So people on the ground in Kenya have not seen the film. And so I'm still working very hard to get them to allow us to bring the film out. I've shown it to a school this week. I actually showed it to children in a school. But I literally just told them, I'm going to do it. It's so important to me that these films are brought back to the people in the countries where they're made. And the film Secrets of the Elephant was made in many African countries and Asian countries. And so I feel that having gotten to the point where I can present, in a way, I'm changing things for all the other scientists and presenters and knowledge keepers from all across the global South. So it would be really a failure if I didn't bring that film, Secrets of the Elephants, back to all these countries, so that all the next group of filmmakers and storytellers who are coming out of the global South continue this trend. We're not making films because it makes money for us. We're not making films because we feel the global North needs to see our films. We're making films because they are vitally important to change behavior and give our incredible biodiversity a chance to thrive.
Yeah, the approach of WildlifeDirect, and clearly your approach, is really multifaceted, and it's clear that a lot of that is informed by really listening and observing the situation on the ground, if you will. I'm curious, we have a commonality of having participated, in landmark programs, but I'm curious if there are ways in which, your participation with landmark programs supports you or empowers you in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've done the entire curriculum and lots of seminars, and I would say it all began with a friend of mine saying to me at a time when elephants were being slaughtered in Kenya, and we all felt utterly, utterly helpless. There was nothing we could do about it. There was no support. Nobody wanted to listen to us. And we were giving up, basically. And she said to me, you have a PhD from Princeton. If you can't do this, nobody can do it. So you've got to almost, I won't put the words in her mouth, but it was almost like step into your power. And she said, there's this course called Landmark Forum, and it starts on Friday. You need to be in the course. And I thought she was sending me to a project management course. That's what I was expecting to be, sitting at a table with a book and writing lots of copious notes. And I found myself in the Landmark Forum, I would say, a very surprising space, very refreshing, difficult. It's not easy. It's very challenging. I really had to question myself. Why was I ready to give up so easily? What was going on with me that I would not speak out? I didn't have the courage to see myself other than a young girl in a very male-dominated society. That on the Monday, in the Tuesday evening, so after the forum, the Tuesday evening session, I felt like I was walking on clouds and, ready to go out there and challenge people. And Seamus, it's not that to me, those people were impossible barriers. They were people who wanted to crush me, people who could kill me, actually, because I was saying that the government was failing in its duty. And I was afraid for my life. But I came out of the forum with, I'm going to walk right into this guy's office and I'm going to tell him exactly what I think. And I walked into the head of the Kenya Wildlife Service office at the time, and I told him that I'd done the forum, and he said, "You're in a cult and you're crazy," and but he did listen to me, and then he invited all his team around, and I sat with all his entire team of senior managers, And I had this incredible conversation about, I'm not out there to make anybody look bad. I'm not out there to crush an organization or get the government to shut you down. I'm trying to move the whole government to take action on preventing the elephants from going extinct. And it wasn't because it affects our economy, not because it affects tourism, but these are elephants and they don't have a voice of their own. They can't speak. They can't go and fight for themselves. They can't go to court and fight for their rights. That really was a major turning point. I think he got that I wasn't after him. I wasn't after his job. I was after one simple cause, which was to save elephants.
One of the things that is very striking for me, and what I highly recommend The Secrets of Elephants. There's a real paradox in that it's a beloved animal, and there's other animals that are beloved, and yet they're endangered. And you're wrestling with shifting people's view. And it's saving these animals is going to transcend economic self-interest. It's going to transcend entertainment. It's going to transcend, I suppose, even kind of being a good person. What would you say is the possibility that really animates you, when it comes to this decades-long effort that you've been engaged in, and both the successes and the setbacks you've had?
I think what really gets me and animates me is that sometimes it just takes one person to see something differently and to be able to communicate it in a way that inspires other people, makes them see things differently. When I walked into the director of KWS's office, I didn't go in there, fighting and ready for a fight. And in fact, I told him, my hands are down. The fight is over. I'm not in here for a fight. And that was a very tough thing for me because I'm known to be somebody who fights. So it was very difficult for me to say to him, I'm not here to fight. I'm here to find a solution. And I had to apologize to him for everything I had done that had caused him to think I was out to get him. And to be able to turn somebody who was so against me, I won't say he became a full ally, but he became enough of an ally that the whole thing worked. We had 13 recommendations that all got adopted in the end. We burned the ivory. We were the shining success case for Africa. He looked amazingly good by the end of it. And to be able to do that as one person and then to transmit that to others. So many people that I know have now come to the Landmark Forum as well. And to be able to see how it just takes one person, it takes one spark for it to be contagious.
The other thing I just heard in what you were saying is that there's just a trust. Trust that you create that possibility, and I'm sure you've gotten plenty of no's. But
yeah, absolutely. And in the Landmark Forum, there was a course that I did where one of the most difficult, maybe it felt difficult at the time, but it's not now, but was to go out and talk to people who are very important stakeholders and ask them how I occurred to them. And to come clean with myself. This is how I occur to these people. And one of the things that somebody said to me was, because you walk such a straight line, we know exactly where you are. Everybody knows where you are. So they will either join you or they will stay away from you because they know exactly where you are. And so knowing that it's as simple as that, staying on my path, staying with my convictions, has made me a very clear person for people to engage. They know that I'm not going to, be nice if things are, or, not be nice is not the right word, but they know that I'm not going to lie about things. They know that I'm not going to tell a lie. They know that I'm going to be truthful. But it's not because I don't like them. It's not because I want to hurt their feelings. And I always remind people, it's not personal. We're trying to achieve something that's much bigger than any of us. And that I think really surprises people, that it isn't really personal at the end of the day.
You've gone through a long personal journey to get where you are, and have the access that you have to make a difference in conservation. And what would you share with somebody who has a passion for something, and yet it seems impossible? It feels like there's so little agreement for what you're standing for, that, or even opposition to it, that you've continued and you've continued. What's your advice for people?
It's funny because the moment you come clean with yourself about why it occurs that way, you start to see where and why it would occur to be so difficult or so impossible. So I mean, when we started our Hands Off Our Elephants campaign, it really did feel like nobody would listen to me, so why bother? But when you get very present to being cause in the matter of everything, going out there and trying something, if it doesn't work, you try again a different way and keep trying and just stay in action, just continually stay in action, and don't ever get to the point where you just throw your hands in the air. I found that was really very, very important and powerful, because if it wasn't important enough for me, then I didn't have any point. There was no point in starting. But I also became very clear to the fact that if I wanted to do something, and the ivory and the elephant crisis and the ivory trafficking we were dealing with seriously bad people, corrupt people, criminals, people who were also derelict in their duty. So there were all kinds of people who were doing things for whatever reason they were doing things. And I never wanted to take it personally. In fact, one of the criminals who we sent to jail, I met him again, literally last year. I met him in an airport, and he reminded me, and he said, "I'm the person that you had sent to jail." And I greeted him, and I said, "How are you? How are you doing? Is everything all right?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm doing all right now." And I just hope that people get that staying in action, being very clear about what you're trying to do, and not, I want to say, not falling off the wagon. We all do fall off the wagon from time to time, but then, restoring your integrity, apologizing, having that courage to apologize and acknowledge what you've done and how it didn't work. This is something that is not just about my work, right? It's in my family. It's among my friends, being able to come back and say, okay, what I did was really thoughtless. I can see how it's impacted, and not make excuses. Just be very clean and straightforward about it and say, okay, let's start again. Let's do it this way. And then doing whatever I can. Every time I make a mistake, try and restore that integrity. I think that really matters, because communication, having that level of communication, in a way, it gives people access to everything that you're doing, and an ability to be part of something that you're offering as well. And I think people look at what I do, and sometimes they wonder, how on earth did she get to where she is? And they think there's a shortcut, or Paula can make a call for me, Paula can wrangle something for me. And I'm like, hey, no, come to the Landmark Forum, because you can create this all for yourself. You don't have to have other people doing it all for you. Come to the forum and come and develop this for yourself.
That's a wonderful endorsement. Thank you. There's some great questions that have started to appear in our chat. Michael is asking, what do you believe is the key to linking storytelling to actual action, including funding and changing behavior? How do you avoid the risk of telling a great story in the moment and then having your audience move on to another story, another entertainment the next day? How do you measure how effective you are in that respect?
Oh, it's a great question. Great question. We have worked on several different series. I'm a creator, and I'm also a presenter. And in my own series Wildlife Warriors, some of the pictures you're seeing come from Wildlife Warriors, I actually started with the impact campaign before we even got to the storytelling. So I actually defined, what impact do I want to create here? I want to see African conservationists getting recognition and creating a movement of African wildlife conservationists. I want to see women profiled, and I want to see girls wanting to come into this field. But I also want to see African filmmakers behind the cameras, because I really do believe that the way that we tell our stories, the gaze is very much influenced by the person who's actually holding the cameras. I've seen that, firsthand. So that's where I start with my own TV series. And as I produce it, I actually work with impact producers, and we design a show that the story itself illustrates the actions that you want your audience to take. And we also work very much on the human emotion. So when we interview our people on TV, we try to get their backstories and get to understand who they are, where they came from, and create a relatedness with our audience. So that's with our young adult and adult series. We did a big series with Disney recently, children's series, where we went even further and we developed a whole theory of change, which led to not only are we producing content, but we're bringing it directly into classrooms, training teachers on how to deliver the content, and working with the children on taking the actions that they see children doing in the film. So the series was child presenters presenting wildlife in Africa, which was the first time it's ever been done. It's really the most audacious project I've ever done. We filmed in 5 African countries with 14 children. And we've seen in one school in Rwanda, was amazing. The film was about the oceans, and they don't have an ocean in Rwanda. They have lakes, but the film was about pollution, and particularly plastic pollution in the ocean. And children in Nigeria were doing this great cleanup on the beach. And these children in Rwanda were just so blown away that people who look like them in Nigeria are doing things that we can do in Rwanda. And within half an hour of watching a film, they formed a club, they went out, they cleaned up the whole school compound, collected all the plastic litter, and started recycling their litter. So sometimes we see really dramatic, immediate actions. Sometimes it takes longer, but we think teachers and educators are the most important constituencies we have to work with, because they are the ones the children spend most of the time with.
Another question from our chat, Desmond is asking, in the face of the challenges you've miraculously navigated, it seems you have a good support system and mentorship. Do you have mentees who you're opening doors for and preparing for the same mettle you possess to go beyond your horizon of impact? That's a wonderful question.
Great question. And I'm often asked that by my board. You're like, where are the little young Paulas? Well, my mentor was Richard Leakey, and he wasn't a traditional mentor. He was just like, when you need help, come knock on my door, but don't come after 6:30 in the morning. He would be in the office at like 6 in the morning. And so I have the same kind of an approach. I have a lot of young people who call me their mentor. And there are some people who I actively am a mentor to, who I have handpicked as people that I want to mentor. 2 of them are cameramen, and one is a filmmaker, young woman who's now at university in England. And I have lots and lots of young kids. Some of them are still in primary school, and some of them have graduated into secondary school. One of them has just started university. So these are young people who I spend a lot of time with, helping them to think through what do they want to become. We do a lot of brainstorming and workshopping, and helping kids to collaborate with each other to make decisions. And a few of them I work with, independently, because I do believe that there are some superstars out there that will create their own movements as well. So yeah, I have lots and lots of young people that I work with. It's one of the, I would say it's the joy of my life, to be honest. It's so much fun.
That's great. I'm going to be selfish. I have a bunch of elephant questions that I'm going to ask before we finish up the interview. But one of the things that I saw in watching The Secrets of Elephants is when it comes to elephants, you talk about acquired knowledge versus instinct. And I was wondering if you could say more about that and how it parallels human beings.
Ah, that's an interesting question. Um, Elephants are so like humans in so many ways. You know, they grow up on a timeline very much like ours. They reach puberty for the females about 11, males around 14. They leave the family, and but the females stay together with their matriarchs for their whole lives. They stay in the same family. Females rarely move to any other family. The family might grow big and split, but they will generally stay with their mothers and with their immediate family. And so the mothers who become matriarchs will live way beyond their breeding age. They will still be breeding, they will still be active as matriarchs, even though they can't breed anymore, which is very unusual in the animal kingdom. And the reason we believe that is so is because they have this massive brain, jam-packed full of information, and they have incredible ability to navigate these extraordinary landscapes, especially unusual climatic periods like what we saw in Namibia, where we had a 40-year storm. The matriarch knew what to do. A younger female may not have known what to do, but the matriarch knows what to do. And I've seen in Zimbabwe, I've seen in Kenya, I've seen females teaching and training their own daughters how to raise their own calves. And that is knowledge that is being transmitted down generation to generation. In some places, it's sometimes, well, it's defensive behavior. In Zimbabwe, for example, the elephants will attack vehicles because actually, probably a lifetime ago, a different generation of elephants were being culled and hunted and killed and basically persecuted by people. So we saw the same thing in the Congo. These elephants have in past generations had very, very negative experiences with humans, and they've retained that knowledge because the matriarchs keep handing that knowledge down, passing that knowledge down. So it's not instinct, because in many parts of Africa where elephants have never been harassed by people, their instinct is not to attack people. Their instinct is just to give them a wide berth. But they acquire this knowledge of what relationship they want to have with people, how they should navigate difficult terrains, how they should move during extreme climatic events, where to find water when it's the drought. And that's all acquired knowledge that they pass on. We don't know exactly how they do it, but we do know they have some form of language. They can communicate in some interesting ways. The fact that the longest elephant study is only 50 years, which is not even the lifetime of an elephant, means that we are still just scratching the surface. So there are plenty more secrets for us to uncover with these extraordinary animals.
It really sounds like culture. The elephants
Yeah,
have culture the way that we have culture.
they definitely do. We saw that in Zimbabwe, how they navigate extreme cliffs. They had a way of moving. They're very cautious. They have to move down these very, very steep cliffs, and they walk very, very carefully using their trunk to check the ground as they move. And you can see that it's something that they learned, and they must have learned hundreds and hundreds of years ago, maybe thousands of years ago, and it's been passed on from generation to generation. You don't see that. I've never seen that with any other population of elephants, where they use their trunk almost like a stick to test ground in front of them and make sure that it's stable enough. And it's not surprising. We see culture with whales as well, and dolphins. So these incredibly intelligent animals that are sentient, they know themselves. We now know that elephants even have names for each other. This really is a culture, and they probably have their own different dialects. We just don't yet know enough about their communication.
One of the other things is in The Secret Elephants, you talk about how elephants and humans evolved together. And elephants actually as a species are around much longer than modern humans. But what and the series also covers Asian elephants and African elephants. What's the evolutionary difference between African elephants, given how social they are, and Asian elephants, which have a domestic relationship with humans in many instances?
Oh, okay. So, I mean, when you talk of their evolution, I mean, there used to be dozens of species of elephants.
Mm.
There used to be many, many different species. And we now know that elephants evolved in Africa. And they were many different kinds of elephants, right? So we had mastodons, we had mammoths and all these things. And the original group came from Africa and moved out of Africa, very similar to humans. And if you go to northern Kenya today, there are fossils of elephants who are 3 times bigger than current African elephants. So the evidence is pretty amazing. And African elephants were never really domesticated. Asian elephants were, I'm going to put it in air quotes, it's not really domesticated because they're not raised like dogs or cats, which are raised and bred for certain traits. Asian elephants are wild, and the babies are taken from their mothers and they are taken into captivity, and they are broken like a horse, and they become domesticated, but they're not really domesticated. They're basically trained. It's a very different practice. And so Asians, and in particular in India and Thailand and these places, they've had a very, very long relationship with elephants when they realized, and it goes back, hundreds of years when people realized, maybe 2000 years when people realized that they could train elephants. And I can see how it could start. If you've ever met a baby elephant, it's like a dog. It's just so hungry for attention. It wants to do the right thing. It's very friendly. And it would just treat a human being like it was another elephant. So they're very, very easy to train. And so they've been trained in Asia, but they were never trained in Africa. Africans didn't really have any other domestic animals than cattle and a bit later on goats. But elephants were not domesticated and not used for any purposes in Africa.
It's fascinating. It's also
But
fascinating the distinction between domestication and trained.
yeah, domestication really is a genetic breeding of certain traits. So cattle, like you have these different types of cattle, they all came from one original cattle. Dogs, of course, we see that very well. But with elephants, the Asian elephants is still the same as the wild Asian elephant. They're literally taken from the wild and trained.
Hmm.
But they call them domestic elephants because they keep them as domestic animals.
The other thing is you say elephants are as smart, if not smarter than we are. Uh, I guess, what do you mean by that? Um, well, I would just say, as humans, we're very arrogant. We have language. We have the ability to make things with our hands and create technology. And
Yeah. I personally think, and I've spent a lot of time with elephants, and I'm sure loads of people here who have spent time with elephants, you can't be with them without feeling a sense of awe and wonder. There is something going on in their mind that you can't put your finger on. They can watch you, they can copy you. I was once sitting on the top of a truck with the American ambassador in Kenya, in Amboseli, and I was filming him. He was watching a herd of elephants, and I was filming him, and I said, do you want to say something? And I meant to the camera. He thought I meant to the elephants. So he turned to the elephants and he waved at them and he said, "Hi, Enid." Enid is the matriarch. And all of the elephants stopped, started rumbling, started walking towards the car, and Enid raised her trunk at him. And then they walked past. So that's what I mean. There is a certain intelligence. I can't explain it, but things that have happened to me and to many of my colleagues. A friend of mine, Joyce, who works in Amboseli, had an amazing experience where during a drought, she saw an elephant whose calf had died. She wouldn't leave her dead baby calf, but she needed to drink. And Joyce was just distraught. This poor elephant was going to die of thirst herself. So she got a basin and she got the water from her jerry can. She poured some water in a basin and put it out for this elephant. And the elephant drank the water and then put her trunk into the vehicle and touched Joyce right on her heart. And I might not have believed it if it was Joyce telling me the story. It wasn't Joyce. It was Richard Leakey was in the car with her. And he said he was so profoundly moved by this act of such gentleness. An elephant can throw your car in the air. It could rip your head off. But this elephant he felt clearly saying thank you. So to me, that's the kind of intelligence that elephants have that I think we are losing as people. We're losing certain connection. We're losing our ability to sense things. Elephants are incredibly sensitive. They're just such a joy to spend time with. But most of the time you're with elephants, you feel like, I don't know, you're in a world of language that you don't understand.
Well, Paula, I can't tell you what a privilege and a gift it's been to have you with us today. Really, really, I'm just like you said about the elephants, there aren't words. It's really, really, really wonderful. And I really thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I hope everyone had a good time tonight.